Today we're going to be adding some short yarn hair onto these mini elf dolls from sweetbriersisters.com. You can use this technique with any doll you like, and we will be doing a beard tutorial shortly. First, you are going to draw an outline of exactly where you want the hair to go on your doll head. And once you have that, you are going to split the hair up into sections. We're first going to work on this first section, which starts with the part, and you're going to put some pins along the part and some pins along the bottom of the section of hair. We're going to be splitting the hair into 3 sections, both sides, the left side, right side, and the back. You want to make sure that you place an equal number of pins along the part as you do along the edge of the hair. So here I believe I have 8 pins on the part and 8 along the edge of the hair, and you will place those as far apart as you need to so that when you wrap your yarn you don't have a big gap in between. Then you're going to take your yarn and you're going to just wrap from the part down along to the edge pins and up and down, back and forth, really just up and down until you get to the front part of the hair. And once you have it all wrapped, you're going to take a needle and thread and make sure that thread coordinates with the color of your yarn. And you are going to sew each loop in place, each loop that you made at each pin. And because I like to make sure that my dolls are nice and sturdy for children to play with, I always try to do a double stitch or a knot on each loop just to make sure it's nice and sturdy. And as you sew, you will just remove the pins as you go. Once you've sewn on each loop, you're going to go ahead and knot your thread, and I like to sink the end of my thread into the fabric so that there's no tail hanging off of my doll. And now we're just going to go ahead and work on our second section in the same way. I'm going to put 8 pins up on the part and 8 down along the side of the hair. And again, you might use a different number of pins depending on how big your doll is and how thick your yarn is. And you'll just go ahead and pass that yarn back and forth between the 2 sides of this section. I'm using a double strand of yarn here because my yarn is pretty thin, and I just wanted to have a little bit of extra bulk. And you can see that even with my double strand of yarn, I had a couple bald spots, so I just went ahead and did a couple extra passes with yarn just to make sure that the hair was as thick as I needed it. And once I got everything looking just the way I wanted it, I went ahead and took my needle and thread and sewed each of the new loops onto the doll. It can be time consuming to do these double stitches on each loop, but I feel like it really is worth the time just to have that extra strength on your doll. Of course, if you were making a doll that would be primarily to look at, or maybe for an adult to just put up as a display, then you wouldn't need to worry about doing the extra stitching. Here we are. We've got both sides of the front done, and we just need to go ahead and work on that back piece. Before I start on the back piece, I'm going to go ahead and sink the tail of my yarn underneath the yarn of the hair just to hide it. And I did that with a crochet hook. If you don't have a crochet hook, you could use a yarn needle or a chopstick, or anything pokey should work. And I'm gonna get started with the back. is quite a bit longer than the front pieces were. So I'm going to just work on the first half of it and sew it in place and then work on the second half. You don't need to cut your yarn in between or anything like that. I just find that if I loop too many pins at a time, then sometimes the yarn just comes off the loops before I have a chance to sew it in place. So you can always work like this on any section. Just loop what you're comfortable will hold, and then you can go ahead with your needle and thread and sew it in place and then add more pins as you go. Now I've got everything sewed down and secured. I'm just gonna keep going to that second half of this section and add some pins. Again, you wanna make sure that you have the same number of pins on top as you do on bottom so that you can wrap your yarn evenly. And again, just like on the top, if you wrap a part and you can see a little bit of a bald spot, you can always go ahead and do an extra wrap or do a whole nother pass, really, as long as you are able to tack it down with your needle and thread later on. It should be fine no matter how many times you go back and forth. So just make sure that you get it the way you want it to look. This is the part that gets exciting because you're almost done and you're starting to see that full head of hair come. You can also, especially if you have a bigger doll, you can tack the hair in place between where your pins are as well, just to make sure it stays where you want it. And when you're done, you'll just sink that yarn underneath your hair and you are done.